Hey everybody, welcome to the NerdNest. I'm Bill, and this is the Anbernic RG40XXH. H means it's a horizontal form factor, unlike the Medium Mini Plus, which is a vertical form factor. The 40 tells me that it has a 4-inch screen, and this review is going to be a little bit different than all of the other reviews that you're seeing about it, because what I decided to do with this video is ask you what you wanted to know about it. Instead of just sitting down and giving you the specs and telling you what I think, I wanted to hear what were the questions that you all had. So I made a community post and a bunch of you responded, and so that's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to answer your questions about this device. But before we get to the questions, I wanted to say that I don't really like this device. There are things about it that I do like, but overall, I feel like this is a device that is not for me. So if that's all you wanted to know, you can click off, just make sure you subscribe before you go. But if you want to know why, well, I've got some questions to answer. Let's start with the questions. Jason asked, everyone is asking about dockability. That's a great question, because one of the reasons that I always get excited when Anbernic includes something that has HDMI out, which, as you can see, this does contain HDMI out. Well, one of the things that I like about that is I might be able to say, okay, I've got one device, it's got my emulation games on it, I can hook it up to the TV, and then when I'm done playing it on the TV, I can just unplug it from HDMI and USB right there and take it with me when I go. And this does that. In fact, it does some pretty cool things that I like a lot. So first off, you can see that this is a 4:3 aspect ratio screen, and most TVs are a 16:9 aspect ratio. This detects that you've plugged it into a 16:9 aspect ratio screen, and it readjusts everything knowing that. So when I'm playing a game on the screen itself with 4:3, I will have different borders around the games that I'm playing than I do when I plug it into a TV, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, along with having HDMI out, it also has Bluetooth, which is really, really important. Because it has Bluetooth, that means you can connect an external controller to it and then hook it up to your TV, sit back on your couch and play your retro games, then unplug them and take them with you. And that's awesome. It doesn't work exactly the way that I would like it to, but there's easy workarounds that you can do. So right now on screen, you can see that I'm plugging in my 40XXH into my computer monitor, and everything switches over, which is awesome. And then I'm going to connect my, I think it's an 8BitDo MD30 is the controller that I'm using. It's a Bluetooth controller. I connect it to the Anbernic 40XXH. It's detecting it as player 2. Which is absolutely an issue. I want to be able to play as player 1 when I sit down to play a game. So what you have to do is you have to go into RetroArch settings and you have to switch it over so that you can be player 1. I would really like a more elegant solution for this, so that when I do plug it into a TV, it automatically detects if I have Bluetooth, automatically make that player 1, and then when I unhook it, automatically switch the built-in controls back to player 1. That's something that I would really, really like to see with maybe firmware updates down the line. Another thing to keep in mind is if you are playing a game on this on your TV and then you unplug it, the screen just does not turn back on. So what you have to actually do is shut your game down, then unplug it, and then you can turn your game back on. But what I would really like to see is have it automatically detect if I've got Bluetooth, make that player 1, and also when I unplug it, do that a little bit more gracefully. Thanks for the question. Next question, Aaron Tech Or says, how is your day going? My day's going fantastic, thanks for asking. Let me know how your day's going in the comment section down below the like button. Guitario666 says, can you compare its 4:3 screen to a 1:1 like cube screen, please? Yes, absolutely, and that's a good question. So right now, while I talk about this, I'm gonna put some B-roll on the screen so you can see just comparisons between different games running on a bunch of different aspect ratio screens. Now, unless you are playing a game or a system that has a 16:9 aspect ratio, I think pretty much 4:3 or 1:1 is the way to go. And if you're playing games that have a 16:9 aspect ratio, I think that you're better off playing those games on more powerful hardware for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're playing those games, most likely those are newer games, and so the emulation is going to be better on more powerful hardware, and the more powerful hardware tends to have 16:9 aspect ratio screens or 16:10 aspect ratio screens, which is going to give you a better experience with that aspect ratio. But for me, almost all of the retro games that I like to play, they all look great on 4:3 or 1:1 screens. And I think that when it really comes down to it, whichever one gives you the best picture with the smallest bezels possible is the one that you're going to want to go with. All right, next question. Bunt wants to know, what is the price? It is $70. Nate wants to know, do I think aliens exist? Nate, we all know that you're an alien. Stop trying to get us to talk to you about it. Flavio asks, as somebody who recently bought the H, is this worth upgrading to? That's a really good question, and I have an answer that I don't think you're going to like. The answer is, it depends. You see, this has the same chipset that's in the RG35XXH. The only difference, I don't want to say the only difference, the main difference between these two handhelds is that the 40XXH has a bigger screen. So if you already bought the 35XXH and you're trying to decide if you want to upgrade to the 40XXH, if you want a bigger screen, sure. Especially if you can find somebody to sell your 35XXH to, or maybe pass it along to a kid or a sibling or a friend or something like that. I really like the bigger screen on this a lot. That being said, if you just bought it, maybe not. And this is something that I think that Anbernic needs to really be careful of, because the pace at which, motorcycle going by, the pace at which Anbernic is releasing these devices is so fast that you are inevitably going to have people who are experiencing buyer's remorse, and they're going to be unhappy that they spent money on this thing because now a new one came out. And because of that, I think that there's a lot of people who recently bought the H who are going to look at something like this and feel like, man, if I had only waited. And I think that that's a very dangerous thing for Anbernic to run into, because you could end up with people who are like, I'm not going to buy this because I'm just going to keep waiting until the perfect handheld comes out. And I don't know if the perfect handheld can come out. I don't know if the perfect handheld can exist. But a lot of people are going to continue to wait for it based on the idea that, I mean, I don't have to wait very long. I only have to wait a couple months before the next, or a couple of weeks before the next one comes out. So definitely something that Anbernic needs to rein in a little bit. Speaking of the H, Egon4564, they said battery life versus the H. This one actually surprised me. The RG35XXH has a 3300 milliamp hour battery in it. This device is bigger. It has a bigger screen. I would have anticipated that this would have had a bigger battery in it, but it doesn't. And somebody might think, oh, did they just keep all of the same internals and put it in a larger handheld? No, they actually don't have the same battery. This has a smaller battery than the RG35XXH. The RG40XX comes with a 3200 milliamp hour battery. The other one comes with a 3300 milliamp hour battery. Now, that difference of 100 milliamp hours, I don't know how big of a difference that's going to make. I don't have an RG35XXH in order to compare it to. But what I will say is you are going to get extremely similar results as you do on the RG35XXH because the batteries are so similar. So whatever you're experiencing on that, you will essentially get about the same, if not a little bit less. So I would anticipate probably around 4 hours of playtime on this. And if you're playing really low-end games, you could probably push that out to 5 or 6 hours. All right, next question is from Jamel. They said, does it pass the Contra Test? No, it fails the Contra Test. I got some very mixed results with this D-pad. This D-pad, when I first was using it, I was like, oh, it feels kind of good. But then I loaded up Contra and I started playing, and I did Russ's patented D-pad. You know what, real quick, if you guys don't know who Russ is, he's on my podcast. He's Retro Game Core. He's awesome. Make sure that you subscribe to his stuff. I don't know if he invented the Contra Test or not. I never asked him about that, but that's what Jamel, I think, if I remember your name properly, that's what I think Jamel is asking about, where you press down on the D-pad and then wiggle it back and forth in order to see if you're getting accidental diagonals. If it passes the Contra Test, you shouldn't get accidental diagonals, and as you wiggle the D-pad back and forth, your character should stay in place. This D-pad is really strange. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. I've got my microphone right here on my chest. I'm gonna push down on the D-pad and wiggle it back and forth and listen. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's clicking. I actually hear clicking as it's starting to, register inputs. And when I was playing Contra, absolutely, I was getting accidental diagonal inputs. So if the D-pad is something that you are worried about, I don't like the D-pad on this. Speaking of the D-pad, we had a question that came in from the Solican 4. They said, is it Hadoukenable and Shoryukenable? Dragon Punchable? I had no problem with Hadoukens, the fireballs in Street Fighter. No problem at all. That worked perfectly fine, which doesn't really surprise me because I was getting a lot of those accidental diagonals in the Contra Test. So anytime that I tend to get more accidental diagonals in a Contra Test, I usually will have an easier time doing fireballs in Street Fighter. As far as the Dragon Punches though, I had a hell of a time pulling off Dragon Punches. And I think that there's a lot of preference when it comes to D-pads. My personal preference for D-pads are D-pads like the one that's on the RG Cube. I really like the D-pad on the RG Cube. The D-pad on the RG40XXH, a different style, and it's just not the style that I personally prefer. The second thing about the D-pad that I don't like has nothing to do with the D-pad. It has to do with where the joystick is on this. The joystick is right underneath your thumb. So when I was trying to do those Dragon Punches, I kept hitting the joystick by accident, which is really frustrating. And I don't know if that was actually affecting my ability to nail those Dragon Punches, but if you are gonna be playing fighting games on this, I would say probably avoid this because there's a lot better options out there just for the D-pad alone. Before I get back to your questions, nobody else asked questions about the controls, and I do want to talk about the controls real quick. Now, I already hit the D-pad, and for the most part, the controls are fine. There's two things that I don't like about the controls on this device. Number one is the joysticks. If you're gonna have joysticks, get rid of Nintendo Switch style joysticks. I know that makes it more pocketable, but I don't like them. They suck, okay? Secondly, I'm not interested in joysticks on a device like this. And listen, I understand that there's a lot of people out there that want joysticks on devices like this. I'm not one of them, and this is my review. So I would say get rid of the joysticks. We don't need them. You'll improve the pocketability. You'll give yourself more room on the front. Just ditch them. They suck. The bumpers, fantastic. Really, really good bumpers. But the triggers are digital triggers, and that is a big disappointment because if you're emulating a game that has analog triggers, you're gonna wanna have analog triggers, and you can't do that on this. That being said, I don't know that it really matters all that much for me because most of the games that I play don't even use triggers. They use bumpers at most, but you know what? That's the controls. let's move on and get back to the questions. BS Marquez asked, how long does it take to boot? Well, let's find out. 1, a 2,
3.
Elaran asked if it could emulate PS2. The performance for this is going to be really similar to all of the other handhelds that have this same chipset. So the short answer is no, probably not. The long answer is this is going to be really good at emulating 8-bit stuff, 16-bit, all the way up to PS1. And on PS1, you can even use enhanced resolution in RetroArch in order to make everything look a little bit better on this display. Once you go past that, though, it's going to have real frame rate issues, and it's not going to be a very good experience. So I would say stay away from anything that comes after PS1. And it can even emulate some PSP games. But again, it's got that 4:3 aspect ratio screen, and the PSP had a 16:9 aspect ratio screen. So it's really not a good fit for this particular device, which is why I always like to say, if you're emulating higher end stuff, just stick with your handheld PC like the ROG Ally, the Legion Go, or the Steam Deck, because those are going to run those games really good, and they have the right screen for it. It's just a better experience. All right, next question comes in from William Knacker. They said, I'm going to paraphrase here, they said it looks uncomfortable to play. Steam Deck got it right, along with Nintendo Wii for, I think they mean Wii U, along with the Wii U for comfort. Yeah, so this is very flat on the back. You don't have handles for your fingers. So when you grip this, in order to grip it, you kind of have to press in with your hands on the sides in order to hold on to it. I would really prefer to have handles that my fingers could grip, kind of like what Anbernic did with the RG Cube. If we look here, you can see the RG Cube has these handles right here. It just makes it so much more comfortable to hold. So what Anbernic did with the RG40XXH is they traded comfort for pocketability. The ability for us to put that in our pocket. Whoops, my microphone almost came out of my pocket. That's what we're trading. We're trading comfort for pocketability. I prefer comfort over pocketability. What about all of you? Let me know in the comments section down below that like button. Comfort or pocketability? What is more important to you? The next one comes in from Michael Benny. Says, can you get it to play Steam games, ports with custom firmware in Portmaster? Yeah, and I actually want to talk about that real quick. So for those of you who are unaware, the review units that reviewers got, including this one, shipped with ports that were not paid for. Okay, so Celeste, Shovel Knight, that kind of thing. The community, the retro gaming community, pushed back on Anbernic, and they said, knock it off. You're gonna screw everything up if you keep doing that. Anbernic said, we heard you loud and clear. We won't be doing that again. So awesome. Yes, you can. You can run Portmaster games on this. It's not why I get devices like this. Another motorcycle going by. It's not why I get devices like this. But if you're looking for a one-step solution that does everything, that can play those games, I wouldn't recommend one of these. I would recommend you get a Steam Deck, ROG Ally, a handheld PC instead of a handheld retro system. Next up, we have a question from Astigos. Hopefully I said your name right. They said, I don't mean this facetiously at all. Why should I care about this? There are hundreds of handhelds that are going to do what this does. How different is it? And is it worth paying for a new one? These questions are mostly aimed at Anbernic, honestly. And I think that that's an absolutely fair question. Why should anybody care about it? Well, because not everybody who is watching a video like this already has one of these things. They might be going into it for the first time and they're trying to decide if this is the handheld for them. But you bring up a really good point. There are so many of these. The market is saturated, which is why recently we did an episode of the NerdNest podcast. It was me, Russ from Retro Game Core, Carrie from the Fox, and Rich from Fan the Deck, and we had special guest Bob Wolf from the Wolf Den, and we all went to Pennsylvania and had a conversation in front of a live audience. It was really, really fun, and this was the topic that we talked about.
It's amazing because there's a handheld for everybody, but it's also just kind of crazy too. So
I think we have to make a pact here as YouTubers. If there's a handheld that comes out and we don't want to make a video about it, email them back and say, hey, this is too similar to the last one. Yeah. I'm not going to make a video on it.
Are there too many of these handhelds? And in order to find out the answer to that, I'm going to say watch this video right here. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.